Welcome everyone. In this presentation, we will review step number 4 of your curriculum development project, which is delineating your objectives. In other words, describing and explaining in detail the objectives that are aligned to each goal. So what are some specific things you can do to meet each goal? Now, using your list of goals you previously developed and ranked, you will identify how you plan to meet those. It's important to note at this point that some of you will become extremely frustrated during this process because you'll probably find that your goal statements are too specific and you're having trouble developing objectives for those goals. Remember, the goal is your final overall outcome or expectation from your program. This is what you ultimately hope to accomplish. This is what you want the students, once they have gone through your entire program, to be able to know, do, and be exposed to. The objective statements are specific things that you are doing towards achieving that goal. So your goals are broad, while your objective statements are very specific. And objectives are clear. They explain with detail how each goal is to be met. They provide enough information so anyone reading the objective will understand exactly what needs to be done and how it needs to be done in order to meet the goal. So let's take a look at some examples in this process of delineating the goals. First, you'll begin with your ranked list of goals. And from that list, you will create 3 content areas or develop these 3 content areas within that goal. So these are things that you will probably be able to do as it relates to that goal. Within each content area, you'll develop 3 objectives. So 3 content areas for each goal, 3 objectives for each content area. Your objectives must address the learning domains. They must include specific details such as a behavior, a condition, and a criterion for demonstrating competence, and I'll explain what that means, but in other words, the objectives must be clearly observable and accessible. They should indicate to what level of achievement each student is able to perform. So let's say, for example, we have our goal list. Here I'm just listing 3 so you can get an idea of the process. Our first goal statement may be something like this. All students or athletes will be able to demonstrate proper techniques in passing a variety of manipulatives. And we may have another goal statement that states all student or athletes may be able to demonstrate appropriate weightlifting techniques and so on and so on. So we have our list of goals. Now notice how broad and general these goal statements are. There can be a number of things that can be done within each one of these that relates to the overall goal. For our first goal, we would then create a list of criteria or a list of activities or things that students will be able to do. And this can be games, specific activities, lessons, skills, or any other expectations that are done in order to meet that goal. For our first goal, since we want our students or athletes to demonstrate passing skills, we can list all of the games or activities that incorporate some form of passing. Our second goal statement discusses weight training or weight training techniques. So we can create a list of weight training expectations, and we can develop this list as extensive as we need to. Now, keep in mind, with a realistic curriculum, you would have multiple content areas, not just 3, but we're just limiting it to 3 for our purposes. Now here, if you are having trouble identifying your 3 content areas within your goal, it is likely that you have developed a poor goal statement. And here's where many people get frustrated. It's expected that you will have some goals that you'll have to redevelop or revise. And I could have easily informed you of this in step number 2, but that's part of this learning and curriculum development process. Reflecting on, revising, modifying, and trying to figure out how the previously developed goals and the steps are correctly aligned. Now note that you've already provided your 3 rationale statements to justify the use of your goal, so you should already have determined that the goal is important, but you may need to rephrase the goal to make it a little bit more broad. Now once you have your list of content areas that can be addressed within each goal, you'll identify 3 of those areas that you want to focus on. We can say for our first goal statement that the 3 content areas we're identifying are volleyball, basketball, and hockey. Our goal addresses passing, and so there's passing expected in each one of these skills or games. Then you'll need to develop 3 objectives for each content area. The easiest thing to do is to develop an objective for each learning domain. So you'll have an objective statement for the psychomotor domain, an objective statement that addresses the cognitive domain, and one for the affective domain. Your objectives must be specific, they must be detailed, and they must be easily accessible and observable. So think about what you could visually look for when students or athletes are completing the objectives and how you can assess that or apply some form of grading or assessment to it. In order to ensure this, they must identify a clear behavior, condition, and criterion. For example, if we were to use our goal statement number 1 and identify our content areas, we'll then develop our objective statements. It may look something like this. Our volleyball content areas would have an psychomotor objective that states the student will be able to, and that's just TSWBAT, or you can say the athlete, perform a proper underhand serve over the net from the serving line each time it's attempted. A cognitive objective statement, which states or could state the student will be able to demonstrate an understanding of the serving strategies and mechanics by receiving a score of 90% on a multiple choice exam. Affective domain objective could state the student will be able to recognize effective passing and complement at least one student's pass techniques during a modified game at least once. We would then do the same thing for the other content areas within our goal. We would then identify the necessary components of our objectives. And looking at the psychomotor objective statement, we can see that the behavior is performing a proper underhand serve. The condition is over the net from the serving line. And the criterion is each time it's attempted. So what we want to see is that every time a student attempts to serve the ball, they have to do it from behind the serving line. It has to go over the net, and we're expecting this to be done each time the student serves the ball. We would make sure that our other objectives meet the same criteria. Our cognitive objectives should include a behavior, condition, and criterion as well as our affective objective statements too. And you can see this can be a lengthy process. So I want you to work effectively with your group and try to disseminate the workload evenly. Through this process, you will see whether or not you have an effective goal statement, and you'll find that if you're having difficulty in developing your learning domain objectives, you may need to revise your goal statement or develop a new one altogether. And this is just part of the curriculum development process. So work through all of these components to make sure that they are effective, that they make sense, and they are accessible. So to quickly review, you will list all 10 rank ordered goals. Each goal will have 3 specifically related content areas, 30 different content areas in total. Each content area will have 3 objectives, a specific, observable, accessible objective, and make sure the objective is related to the goal. And the objectives must address all the learning domains, so you'll have one for psychomotor, one for cognitive, and one for affective. And each objective should clearly include the behavior, the condition, and the criterion. And one thing that I want you to do is avoid using the same behavioral criterion of like 2 out of 3. A lot of people will get into the habit of saying things like a free throw. Students must be able to perform a proper free throw during a game situation and make 8 out of 10, or do this 8 out of 10 times, or something to that effect. Those are very simple, ineffective goal statements, because that's not what you're looking for when you're, especially in a K through 12 physical education setting. In a game situation, it's still unrealistic, but it's more likely to happen if you are a coach. You're more likely to use something like that 2 out of 3 times, 4 out of 5 times as your criterion. But I don't want to see that over and over and over again, because that means that you're not really thinking through this process and not really coming up with a creative criterion that students are being challenged with. So think of something realistic. Don't continually use an example like that. Also, your groups should disseminate the workload evenly so that each member of your group or your curricular team has an equal amount of goals that they need to delineate and work through. And as you begin to complete this process, do it on one page. So everyone's going to contribute, and you are going to include your name before each section, just like you did in the previous step, where you are being assessed specifically on the components that you have developed. And that should really be it for this step. If it's unclear, if you still have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Take care, and we will see you online.